Chapter 5. Despite his earlier promise, Tom flicked again at the tiny annoying flies that plagued their days in the shed. He suspected his back was already covered with the creatures and knew the sensation of legs as thin as hair landing or padding across his skin would have to be ignored. He never got used to them targeting the corner of his eyes after his tears, but bush people learned not to keep brushing at them because it was an action in vain. There were too many to fight, and those flies were going to share their lives for as long as the sheep were here and the men were sweating over them. Granny strode into the pen and grabbed a lamb by its forelegs, and the session began. He had the wool of his first animal within 4 minutes, and he was only going to get faster. Jacko leapt to the cast aside fleece, and Bingo began sweeping, while the gun pushed his sheep through the hatch, sending it skittering outside, and was already reaching for the next terrified lamb. Tom grabbed the small fleece and tossed it easily. It landed perfectly on the long narrow timber slates of the table as he knew it would, and he had known how it would land from the second his fingers let go. "It's an art, Tom," his father had said when Tom had first said he was interested in classing. As young as he had been during this conversation, Tom had been able to make his point eloquently. "Wool classing takes concentration. I've watched Lou for years, Dad. A wool classer only has moments to make his decisions and has to be confident in making them. Plus, they have to make that throw land every time, 100 times a day. I'm not saying shearing isn't skilled, but it's about brawn. Doesn't need any calculation." His father had shrugged. "It's your funeral, Tom. Shearing pays well. Wool classing won't ruin my back. If Lou will take you on and teach you, I don't care what you do as long as you earn your keep." It was a harsh response, but since his mother's passing, Vern had lost his happy-go-lucky approach to life, becoming brooding, aggressive at times. When Tom turned 11, 6 months after they lost his mother, his father disappeared for 10 weeks, left Tom to fend for himself, or rather to get on with life amongst the station hand. He kept cooking their breakfast, stirring an enormous bowl of porridge, or cooking eggs as best he could, or grilling chops and looking after animals. Soon enough he found himself hanging around the sheds and watching its high activity over summer. He'd taken on a rouseabout role as soon as he was old enough and began to earn for himself, living at and working for Witchelina Station as opposed to joining one of the shearing gangs. The family at the homestead had known and liked his mother, and saw to it that the boy who had been born there now had a permanent role, doing all sorts of jobs around the place. When the shearing or crunching season had passed, most of the rouseabouts took on shearing roles when they were of an age, but Lou had given Tom the chance he craved to learn how to class wool. Once he'd spent a few years at the rouseabout, Tom had become Lou's roller. "Never worked with anyone this young on the table before. Boy, don't let me down," Lou had warned. He hadn't. Tom's ability to concentrate, take instructions, and learn fast meant he was rolling and skirting the fleece efficiently far earlier than most apprentices had in Lou's estimation. When Lou had finally retired, Tom had stepped up and taken on the role gladly, but he still resisted joining the roving shearing gangs. His father, due for retirement himself, had asked why only once. "What's wrong with you, lad? Guaranteed work most of the year and top dollar no less. You shouldn't be sneezing at that. Not in these tough times. Chance to move with the rest of the blokes." Tom had shaken his hand. "I'm happy here. I don't care much for change." Vern had grumbled at him, and Tom could believe his father had lost faith with him. No more singing and dancing. Barely any amusement. He couldn't remember the last time he'd made the man smile, probably when his mother had still been alive. It seemed to Tom that his father had begun treating him as a stranger from the moment he was no longer a dependent child, which in Tom's estimation was age 10, the day Mora had passed. Perhaps that was harsh, Tom mused. Maybe more like an unwelcome relative. He was perceptive enough to sense his father felt obligated to acknowledge him, but there was no affection left for his son. Also, it seemed to Tom. Tom couldn't work it out then, and was none the wiser now, nearly 2 decades on, as to what he had done wrong. In recent years, when Vern was in his cups, he'd cry and talk about Moira and the baby, and so it was then that Tom had begun to blame himself for his mother's and sister's death. He hadn't done enough, hadn't driven Bonnie fast enough, hadn't sought help urgently enough. They died because of his inaction or carelessness. The notion was terrible, but as seductive as it was infectious, colouring his thoughts with deep regret whenever he had time to himself to think. The silence he'd once considered a companion was now his enemy, because it reminded him of loss, of all of it his fault. Vern had died, not saying it, but conveying blame on his son to his last breath, so Tom believed. How could he not? He'd held his father's hand as his breathing had become laboured, and told him that he loved him, but in a final shocking gesture, his father had fought the strength to pull his hand away with a grimace. There had been such naked aggression to the gesture, and to this day Tom wondered what his father's hostility meant. Ready, Tom? He's nearly finished, Ronnie warned, and the others aren't far behind. Tom snapped out of his memory and gave an almost imperceptible nod. In the same heartbeat, the rouseabouts moved in to do their skirting. Suddenly there was no time for anything other than getting the fleece sorted and fluidly over to the wool press, which was already groaning its metallic sound in readiness. Sheep bleated, not in unison, but laid, so the sound was discordant and pitiful. There was fear from the animals and tension around the troop of shearers as sweat already gleamed on strained muscles. The mechanical shearers hummed beneath the high-pitched shriek of the blades, being sharpened by the expert. Granite liked to swap his blades every couple of fleeces. It added time, but Tom admired his confidence that those extra moments spent changing over made him faster overall. Tom could remember early autumns when the wool was so fly-blown and dirty that he spent far too much time separating out the maggots while the fleece piled up, but not today. This wool already looked top quality to him. The two lads rolled either side, stepped back, and Tom was touching the wool in the next instant. His expert gaze had already told him almost of what he needed, but now his fingers would confirm that he had what he had sensed. The quality was excellent. He knew from a quick click of his thumbs and second finger that the tensile strength was superb, while the value of the wool grease was high. That meant the fleece was in top condition. The colour was bright, with no daggy yellowing, and the neat, bold crimps that were neither too curly nor hairy meant the style was tip-top, as Lou used to say. 3 a.m, he murmured, more for Ronnie's benefit, as the apprentice learned his new lay of learning. Get on with the other bits, which were the bellies, locks, and top knots, were now Ronnie's responsibility. He would rapidly check for stains, vegetation, and any other matter that might contaminate the main fleece, which Tom had classed as the best merino available. Meanwhile, the other hands got busy sweeping as Tom insisted on a clean working space. Ronnie began his task as Tom was striding to the bin, folding the fleece as he removed, then tossed it nearly into the press. By the time he turned, Ronnie was moving to put the other bits in their respective bins, and he was back at the table ready to roll the second fleece within seconds. Tom was not looking at anyone now. It would be fleece after fleece until the session was done. His focus was complete, and after half a dozen fleece, he knew he was hitting his best speed, and was pleased to know that Ronnie was keeping up and not getting in his way. Once Tom hit his stride, he would give himself only 10 seconds to look and feel each fleece, but another 20 seconds to walk to the bin and be back in position. He caught a wink from the number 2. Granite reckons he's going slow, mate. He can go as fast as he likes, Ronnie said, taking up the challenge on Tom's behalf. We're yawning back there, here. Tom heard the laughter, the exchange of friendly insults, the growling of Granite as he complained that the ewes coming in had full bellies and were cranky. They need much more rest after a full feed, he yelled at the station manager, who had made the error of coming into his eye line. That mob can cause accidents when they're angry. The man must have nodded or moved on or offered placitation. Tom couldn't hear. He heard only the scream of his mother in the sound of the bleating sheep, and the soft smile of a generous stranger, younger than him, who promised to take care of the dead woman in his family. Why that little girl haunted him still, he couldn't say. It had been such a brief moment in his life, and yet she'd had a big effect, giving more comfort in the few minutes they spent together than any adult could, especially his father. The midday meal bell heralded the arrival of cold mutton and freshly baked bread, which Bingo had sent had been sent to collect. It was still warm from the oven of the underground forge at Farina. Relieved to take a break after the morning's work, Tom was helping himself to the food set up on the tables when the expert sidled up. I think we need some maintenance on the shaft, Tom. Going slow, the man nodded. The gun will complain otherwise. Just gives him something else to blame if he doesn't hit his goal. I can hear it beginning to struggle. Tom gave a nod. Sparrow? The lad looked up, his mouth stuffed with bread. Tom smiled. He could remember a time when his belly felt like it could never be filled fast or often enough. Can you get up and oil the shaft before we start again, say in the next few minutes? Yes, boss. Like I've taught you, careful at every stage, right? Sparrow grinned around his mouthful. I know. Granite looked up from his midday meal. Yeah, watch your head, boy. I was working a shed not so long ago up in New South Wales, and a bloke got his whole scalp flare torn off. We had to take his skin with him so they could sew it back on. The lads thought he was joking and laughed, but Tom knew Granite was not entertaining them. Sparrow, all I need is for you to top up the oil and keep the bearings cool. I'll switch off the engine now. You finish what you're eating quickly and get the ladder. Sparrow took another huge mouthful of the sandwich he'd grated, juice from the mutton rolling down to his wrists and beyond. Tom blinked. He'd surely never be able to chew it, let alone swallow it. He left the lad to his dilemma and walked away to the engine room, flicked off the switch that turned everything quiet around the shearing shed as the drive wheels spun to a halt. He headed back out and away from the men to eat alone somewhere. It wasn't friendly, he knew, but he preferred his own company away from the pointless ribbing and banter that would inevitably ensue once the chewing was done. He pretended he was checking on the bales from the 2 morning sessions and looking over the new mob of sheep they would tackle in afternoon sessions, getting a measure of the quality coming through. From the corner of his eye, he saw Sparrow getting up the ladder before he went in search of the oil can to fill the individual bottles that fed the bearings. Everything had its place in Tom's neat shed. Sparrow wouldn't have to hunt for it. Tom leaned back against a fence post, chewing thoughtfully as he recalled a pair of intrigued hazel-coloured eyes that had once regarded him over a generous smile. He wasn't surprised by the thought the young friend from Adelaide had invaded his thoughts regularly over the years. He had been 8 then. He began to wonder what she might look like now. Distantly he heard Granny beginning another story about a shearer with an ass that was feeling rough, as he put it, who decided he'd cool it down by sitting in the flour sack that the cook used to make their bread. I tell ya, we were all very suspicious of our damper each evening. Tom tuned out the laughter and let his thoughts run back to Fleur Appleby, who had been arresting even at 8. He'd never forgotten her name or those large inquiring eyes. They seemed to know him even though they'd just met, and were not only not one so too easily tear one's gaze from. They held you while they studied you. The hair round her heart-shaped face was darkish, but could hardly be called just brown. It was rich like polished Australian blackwood, striped with warm tones of treacle and even burnt umber. Fleur Appleby had her own special drawer in his mind, which he slid out from time to time to ponder what Fleur was doing now. She would be in her late 20s. Was she engaged? Married? Probably. She might even have a clutch of children already. Her husband would be someone of standing in the community and no doubt smart. He'd have to be content with Fleur's quick-witted ways. Distantly he heard the engine grind into motion again in the shearing shed. Sparrow had likely finished the oiling hours, running the machinery through its checks. He smiled absently, remembering the little girl who had taken on that horrible housekeeper in Adelaide. She'd been quite a cheeky thing, so confident and disarming in her directness. It would be intriguing to see whether she'd become. Tom's notion never reached any further. The gut-twisting shriek chilled his thoughts, froze him momentarily as he blinked through the sharp sunlight to the shed and realized it was a young apprentice screaming for help. Tom flung away from his bread and mutton and launched himself from the fence, yelling at the others who were already in motion. The sound of Sparrow's shock and pain stopped him once again as he skidded into the gritty boards in the shearing shed, starting the mobs waiting. They too kicked up a pile of dust as they tried to push away from the disturbance, and Tom had to blink it away, looking up to where the trainee rouseabout was trapped, being hurled about in overheat head shaft, the bearings complaining loudly. Others arrived, a heartbeat behind him, full of exclamation, looking up to where Sparrow writhed, begging for it to stop. What the bloody hell? It was Bill the expert. Ah, you poor bastard, Granite murmured. Tom raced to switch off the engine that would end the mechanical motion overhead, but he already knew it wouldn't end the cries of agony. Granite stepped forward, but wasn't quick enough to catch Sparrow, who fell heavily the 6 feet or so, crunching to the boards in a thumping sound Tom knew would haunt his dreams. He looked to be unconscious as the men hurried to his side, but no, Sparrow's eyelid flicked open. He groaned softly as Tom touched his shoulder. Sorry, Tom. Don't move, mate, he urged. It was too late now to ask the youngster why he had risked being on the ladder while testing the machinery. It was the first rule, only test the machinery from the ground and away from the harm. How many times had he drummed that into the lad? Tom grabbed one of the others, open mouthed and wide-eyed in fright. Bingo. Go fetch the truck. He flung the lads the keys he hauled from his pocket. Move, Tom yelled as the youngster's gaze seemed to swim. He turned to Nobby. Go fetch some grog. Not beer, proper liquor. You'll find some in the cupboard in the hut. Be quick, Nob, fast as you can. Jacko and Doug already knew to give their boss their full attention and stepped up with frightened expressions, awaiting an order. Jacko, fetch a pillow and a blanket, hurry. Now Tom turned to the men. Granite, you're the strongest. I'll need your help, mate, if we have to get him into town. Granite nodded, and relief flooded Tom that the gun wasn't going to start complaining about his numbers of loss of time. Tom eyed Granite. Number 2, Don, fetch some water. Yeah, for sure. No rice crack for once. Don straightened and headed out of the shed. Finally, Tom turned to the expert. Call a hospital, Bill. Can you see if there's a doctor anywhere close? Ronnie, you, Granite, and me. We'll lift him in the truck when it gets here. All shearing forgotten, the men worked together to make Sparrow as comfortable as they could without moving him too much. His body looked strangely twisted as they lifted his head to first get some water into him. Tom, I can't feel my legs. You're in shock, that's all. It's to be expected, Tom lied. He had no doubt that Sparrow's spine was injured and his rouseabout days had finished before they got going. No, I can't feel my fingers either. I don't think I can move my hands. You lie still, Peter. Give your body a chance. It's been hurt, and you've gone into shock. Tom tried again. He glanced at Granite, who met his gaze with a small shake of his head. Tom had to look away from the truth in that gesture. More brandy helped to quieten the growing panic that Sparrow was displaying. They began pouring copious slugs of the liquor into his mouth, anything to dull his anxiety, because he wasn't complaining of pain, which felt ominous. The sound of the bleeding sheep, even the touch of the annoying flies, were forgotten. Do we get him up? Doug asked, looking for like a frightened child. We don't move him an inch until we get some advice, Tom said. Granite pointed to Sparrow's shirt. This is what got caught. See, it happened before, but the bloke didn't get twisted up like this poor bastard. Bill returned with features grimly said, no doctors in town, maybe day after tomorrow. The men cursed as one beneath their breath. The nurse said they'll do what they can for him if you get him to the hospital. Tom, reminded of his previous experience, wanted to ask what hospital, but held his tongue and nodded instead. Let's get the truck backed up to that door, and then we'll carry him slung on a sheet so we're not hurting him any more than we need to. Give him more brandy, but he's out of it for the trip. Best he'll be out of it for the trip to town. It was Bill who spoke up. Tom, let the station hands take him into town. You're joking, mate. Sparrow's my response. Bill didn't flinch. So are all these men and their livelihoods, and all these sheep to be finished today. Your responsibility is first to the station owners. You can't do any more for the boy today, but others can while you keep the work going. Keep us all distracted, if nothing else. It was the voice of reason. Neat, ordered, clear thinking. Tom couldn't argue with it. Right, he murmured. Bill, will you? Already done, Tom. They heard the truck arrive. Let's get him loaded on the flatbed and you boys can get back to work. With Tom barking instructions, the drunken Sparrow was slung gently in a sheet and carried to the truck. He moaned as he was laid onto the bed of the truck. I thought he'd carry on more, Doug commented, tapping into the Tom's great fear, because he had expected more protest too. The thought leapt across his mind that Sparrow's back had been broken, which might account for him not feeling much any more, but he refused to say it. He let the others think it was the grog, and hoped they were right. The first station hand was a young fellow called Stu. Tom eyed him hard like a hawk watching prey. Now, Stu, this young bloke is very badly injured. You have to drive slow, mate, all right? Real slow. Stu nodded, looking terrified. I'll bring in Wilco with me so we can carry him to the hospital. Good idea, Tom said, finding a grim smile that he was struggling to feel. Right, you two, thanks. Just be gentle with him. Bill added his 2 cents worth. Something might be broke on that boy, lads. You don't want to make it worse. He cut Tom's a look, and Tom knew that Bill was thinking along the same lines as him. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of horror. For the most part, the men were uncharacteristically quiet, working hard, fast, and no one complaining for any reason. For once, Tom's ability to withdraw into himself was a genuine advantage as they worked on, and Ronnie stepped up, taking on more responsibility. Being one labourer down didn't slow the work, but Granite seemed to understand, and compassion slowed his shearing too, and because all the shearers took their lead from the gun, the work kept flowing at its new, less frenetic pace. They might not make 1,200 today, but they would try. The wait for news was like a wraith darting around them, poking and prodding every now and then, but invisible nonetheless. He felt like a chill each time it stole up and reminded Tom what was happening beyond the shed in Farina town. The news finally came along after the day's work was done. 4 sessions complete, and all the blokes were sitting around the veranda once again contemplating a roast mutton dinner and drinking long-neck beers. The sun had set. No one seemed in any hurry to stop drinking or start eating. Granite had showed the youngsters how to cool their beers with a wet linen wrapped around them that would evaporate its moisture in the breeze. Takes the boil off, you see, Granite explained, trying to brighten the leaden mood, and Tom liked him more for it. Still, the heavy atmosphere clung on. As the day's light disappeared, Tom heard the truck's arrival. He was planning to use the same vehicle to go to the hospital and stood up impatiently. He half hoped, knowing it was a motion, that Sparrow might be seated in front, giving a thumbs up with his lopsided grin. There was no sign of him, though. A pit opened in Tom's belly, and the smell of the roast coming from the oven, which would normally cheer everyone, seemed to do the opposite. The truck drew to a slow stop, and even the 2 lads, reluctant to get out of the vehicle, told Tom that the news was not going to be good. Broken back, crippled, he'd look after Sparrow. They'd work it out. The shearing team stood as one, bottles of necks in hand, and moved to cluster around Tom as though to offer comfort. Stu killed the engine and finally opened the door. Even in the dimming lights, his eyes looked red. Tom could barely find the right words. They came, nevertheless, arriving into the awkward pause and not bridging the gap smoothly. They kept him then? Yes, Stu said, averting his gaze and tears arriving in the morgue. Boss. Tom blinked. He couldn't have heard right. The blokes around him gave soft gasps. One whistled a sound of disgust. Tom stared so hard at Stu it was as if his gaze had the power to lift the lad's chin and demand he looked at him. Sparrow's dead? Stu swallowed and knuckled away his tears. He nodded. The nurse said it was the kindest thing anyway. Nothing they could do. His spine was broken, they reckoned, and even if they had been able to get him to Adelaide, there was little to be done to fix. He'd have no life, the senior lady said. There was more words in one breath than he'd heard Stu say in any given week. He looked traumatized, and with his mate Wilco shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. Tom walked up and squeezed Stu's shoulder. He cleared his throat. He wished now he had taken the lad himself and not let these youngsters bear the brunt of the rouseabout's death. You did your best, and I'm grateful. We all are, that you got him to hospital. Join the boys, have a drink and have a meal. You'll feel better, Stu. What else could he say? He looked at the other station hand. He didn't know. Well, thanks, Wilco, for being there. The lad tried to say something, but clearly couldn't find any words, and Tom understood. I'm taking the truck. I'll go pay my respects to Peter. He couldn't wait to leave the lineup of shocked, unhappy expressions, but he drove towards Farina as slow as he dared. He was in no hurry to look upon Sparrow's broken corpse. Mother, sister, father, Peter, just seemed to be Tom's regular companion. Thanks for listening.